Of course, darling, let's go to the casino, drink some wine and things like those. Of course, darling, you know everything cries the most. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us, that you're gonna play some roulette. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. Take our truce. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we're gonna go to the casino, we're gonna play some roulette. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us, so come on. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we're gonna drink some wine, we're gonna have everything we want. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. That we're gonna play some roulette, we're gonna drink some wine, we're gonna make some money. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is truth. Of course, darling, we're gonna play some roulette. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That if not, we're gonna be like la la la, you know that, darling. So let's play some roulette. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That you have my truth. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we can share. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That no one can against us. Of course, darling. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we're gonna go to the casino, we're gonna have everything we want. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we're gonna play some roulette. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That you have my choice, and we're gonna be like la la la. So darling, just let us play some roulette. Of course, darling. That is what you can have, that you can feel. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That no one can against us. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can see. That no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That you're gonna be so fun. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can say. That no one can against us. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we're gonna play some roulette and we're gonna be so fun. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we're gonna have some wine, we're gonna go to the casino, we're gonna drink some wine in the casino. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. That we have anti-Christ moves. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. That we're gonna smoke some hash. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That we are here. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That everything engage. Of course, darling, you know that. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That you have my truth, we can share. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against us. So come on, of course, darling. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That we're gonna make some money. We're gonna eat the whole barbecue. Of course, darling, we're gonna eat the whole barbecue, drink some wine like the Antichrist. Of course, darling, we're gonna smoke some hash, of course, darling, and we are gonna count our money. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that we're gonna win. Of course, darling, you know that, so come on. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that you have my truth. So let's share, of course, darling. You know I don't wanna be safe, that I don't want none of your kids, that I don't wanna be safe. When I die, I don't wanna be saved. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that I wanna be alone. Of course, darling, you know that. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is what you can see, that no one can against us, that we're gonna have some tools and we're gonna share, we're gonna play some roulette and we're gonna win. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against us, that I don't wanna be saved. Of course, darling, you know that. Of course, darling, and then we're gonna go to the jacuzzi and we're gonna drink some champagne. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against us. Of course, darling, we're gonna drink some champagne in the jacuzzi. Of course, darling, you know that we're gonna drink some wine like the Antichrist. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against us. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that I don't wanna be saved. Of course, darling, we're gonna drink some champagne in the jacuzzi. We're gonna share our truth. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. A kiss and bye. I love you so much.